Perfect. Welcome everyone. My name is Christy Pelland. I'm with She Jumps, and She Jumps is all about increasing the participation of women and girls in the outdoors. Tonight we have Sonja Beckerhoff, who's sharing her story. And I just want to remind everyone that if you have questions, please feel free to jump in. We've got a small group here tonight, so just unmute yourself and jump right in and ask that question with Sonja. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, you certainly can put it in the chat and I'll read it off. But let's go ahead and get started. Sonja, take it away.
Thank you. Hi. So it's me, Sonja here, and I'm calling in from from the Blue Mountains, which is about 120 kilometers outside of Sydney in Australia. It's winter here. We have about 0 degrees centigrade, which is about 32 degrees Fahrenheit. Yes, so maybe we'll go around the traps first. So Christy, where are you calling in from?
I'm calling in from the Tacoma, Washington area, out by Mount Rainier.
Lovely. And Susan?
I'm calling in from Colorado, right near Loveland.
Lovely. And you do a lot of hiking?
I try to do as much as I can, at least once a week.
Cool. Favorite trail snack?
I guess Cliff Bar. The chocolate mint one.
Ooh, sounds yummy.
It's
I
good.
think I've seen them. I don't think I've seen them over here in Australia. And Astrid, you're on mute.
Calling in from Sydney, from the Sutherland Shire. Yeah, close to the coast. Yeah.
And you do a lot of hiking?
Probably not as much as you do, but I do my best. Yeah, I'm more an amateur, to be honest.
Oh,
But
amateurs here.
Room for improvement.
Room for improvement. Lovely. And you have a favorite trail snack or something you take away?
No, maybe nut mix.
Nut mix. Cool.
Yeah, and apples and yeah.
I think I'm probably sort of in between Susan and Astrid because I have chocolate and nuts to go along with me. So, all right. Look, maybe we'll just get started. And if you've got any questions, just pop in. Can everybody see my presentation?
Yep.
Okay, lovely. So it's called 51 Days and 820 Kilometers of Adventure, and it's about the Australian Alps Walking Track, which is a hike from essentially Melbourne to Canberra. And I did that hike back in 2014, and it was unsupported by third parties. So it's just my husband and me, and we spent 51 days in the wild on a track that only about 20 people complete every year. So for 7.5 weeks, 51 days, we relied on our planning, on our resilience, and our personal resources as we negotiated like in excess of 60,000 meters of altitude. So that's up and down. In comparison, Mount Everest sits at 8,800 and some meters, and you start at Lukla. So it's a little bit, it's quite different, but 60,000 meters of altitude. And we had some wild weather, we had scarcity of water, but then on the other hand, we had the ultimate privilege of exploring remote wilderness areas and this experience that is away from the constant availability because we have no mobile reception where we are. And so what we discovered along the way was that you can achieve a lot if you really put your minds to it. And in this presentation, I'll take you through, some of the skills that you need to develop, some of the knowledge that you need to have, what the planning looked like, and how did this all work? Because back in those days, I had a full-time corporate role, and there were challenges to overcome personally and professionally. So this is a little bit about what this presentation is all about. So, some first thoughts. How did this all come about? I think that's something that a fair few people find of interest. And it's funny, even though this is in 2014, I remember it like yesterday. I asked my husband, "Are you still interested in that hike from Melbourne to Canberra?" And I was sitting on the sofa in the lounge, and he looked at me like, "Are you like totally out of your mind?" And I got it because I had just finished a 100-kilometer hike. I had done 31 hours across Sydney's coastline. I was absolutely sleep deprived. I'd been awake for 36 hours. Each step in the upwards I was wearing was painful. And along this 100-kilometer hike, I had actually suffered from hypothermia. So he looked at me and goes like, "Are you totally out of your mind?" because he thought logically the last thing that should be on my mind was another hike. And yet I remember sitting there going, something in this 100 kilometer changed something for me. It's like, what else can I do? So a bit about me and how I got to where I am today. I grew up in Germany. You may hear a bit of an accent there. And I did spend a couple of years in the eastern part of the US in New York and Connecticut. When I was growing up, I was one of the last people to get picked for a sports team at school. At tennis, they called me the movement wonder, because if I had to take more than 3 steps to get to the ball, I wasn't interested. I tried my hand at piano, at ballet, horseback riding, and I did in generally enough to get by, but I didn't really excel at anything. The only thing that maybe stood out was when I went to uni and I studied Chinese, and I was one of the few people who started and one of the fewer people who even finished that. And so ultimately that took me to China and then later on to Australia. So there's a photo of me about 9 years old, 10 years old. And you can see while I'm standing in the bush somewhere on the West Coast near the Rockies, I wasn't really dressed for hiking, you know. Yeah, so that wasn't really on the mind. My introduction to hiking came back when I was a 4-year-old with my dad, who took me hiking in Switzerland. And I don't really recall the trip. The only thing I do remember, and there's no photo of this, there's me with a little red backpack with white straps. And the only thing I know in hindsight is that that trip could have ended quite badly. So mom's reaction to this was, she said, you and dad are never ever going to go out on a hiking trip again. So that sort of culled those aspirations, if there would have been any at that point in time. The next time I went hiking was with my husband through the French Alps. And even then I wasn't overly impressed by hauling a massively big backpack up the mountains and going, oh, this is just not fun. Yeah, the views are great, but it's just not worth the effort. And then sort of fast forward to living in Australia, where I did an MBA. And it was during that time that we sort of started exploring the Australian Alps a little bit more. And back in those days, we didn't have GPS. And that led to one of our first experiences in the Australian Alps that were probably sub-ideal is what I would call them. We've been wandering around the ridge at the back of this hut here, somewhere over here at the top. And it was getting dark and we couldn't find the way down. And so, yeah, we just decided, okay, we're gonna have to go bite the bullet, and we just went straight down, and it was overgrown. We had to wade through a river in the middle of the night. We do have snakes in Australia, so it wasn't really great. And I remember actually getting to this little hut called Schling's Hilton, and don't let yourself be fooled by that name. It's not anything like a Hilton. But I remember literally being sick with exhaustion and relief after making it. And so one thing we took away from that is planning and maybe a recognition on when to stop the next time and not just push through for the sake of pushing through. So in summary, at this point, there was nothing that indicated to me that I would actually ever enjoy going on a long distance hike. But we did settle in Australia, and we started with weekend hikes. We went back to the snows. And so eventually I got into this hiking thing. And then I came across at work through this thing called Coastrek, which is a coast walk along the east coast of the eastern part of Sydney for a charitable cause. And I thought, oh, gee, okay, well, maybe why not? So the first year I signed up for 50Ks, and then a year later I did the 100Ks. And so that is what essentially then led me to the Australian Alps Walking Track. And there's a photo of the book that we used as a guide and a photo. So in summary, first thoughts is, should I or should I not? Can I or can I not? I know that's a bit long-winded, but what I'm saying that is, you know, your past may not necessarily be an indication of where your future could take you. So we were then looking at the planning phase and looking at the book that I just showed you. And here is a usable version. We cut off the spine so we could take it with us on the trip in various sections. But the Australian Alps Walking Track, it's 650 kilometers at its shortest, and at the least you're covering 55,000 meters of altitude. And things that we had to take into consideration were food drops, route planning, and equipment. Because when you're not walking through any township, then there's safety, communication, and planning for a worst case scenario, which I always call the what if. 10 weeks leave from work, the impact on my career, on our careers, and our relationship. We decided to have a charity with the National Parks and Wildlife, and we were going to build a website. So I'll put that into a bit of perspective. So we had a lovely graphic designer who helped us with some of the graphics. It's Astrid. I do want to call you out there on that one, Astrid, because a lot of what we had on the website probably wouldn't have happened without you. So thank you very much. But this is essentially it. So you see there's a map of Australia down here. There's Melbourne and Canberra. And that is essentially what the trip would look like. And on the side here is you can see screenshots, and it's like one mountain after the other and some of the peaks that are listed here. Susan, I don't know how familiar you are with meters and foot, but it's essentially ×3 to get to the American way of, when you talk about altitude foot. So reading through this book that I showed you before, we realized we were going to need a lot of time. It was 650 kilometers at its shortest. And we knew that we didn't want to make a race out of this. We actually wanted to enjoy the experience. So the next thing was we felt that we sort of had enough experiment with off-track hiking at that point in time. And now it came down to the detailed planning, and it was really where would our individual strength be and how could we best put them to use. So in the meantime, this is a couple of years later, we had started using GPS, and we used a map, compass, and an altitude meter as backup. And this is what my husband really excelled at. So he got that job. He got all the planning, the GPS, the routes and stuff like that. And so for me, that left equipment and food. So I researched tents and sleeping bags, all weather clothing, water sterilization, and food. And during that planning phase, we decided that safety was going to be a top priority, and then followed by comfort and then speed. So again, like I said, we didn't want to make a race out of it. At the same time, because we were carrying everything, we didn't want to lose sight of weight. And so we made a decision for a 3-person, 4-season North Face tent and sleeping bags that would give us comfort even in sub-zero temperatures. And I spent weeks and weeks on a spreadsheet calculating food quantities, weight, calories, and always backup and contingency plans. And the other thing that I mentioned before is the time away from work. So my Coastrek participations had already sort of laid the way for us, and my manager knew that if I asked for something, it's definitely going to be left field. Normal didn't quite fit, and I got the label of, crazy Sonja again, which somehow made it easier to broach this topic. So I went to my manager and said, look, 10 weeks. And she goes, right. Okay, when did you want to do that? And I said, a year from now. So I think giving that much notice really helped for such a long plan, for such a long hike. And I went for unpaid leave as well. And so that worked really well because the teams that I was working with, they had about a year's notice, and they could prepare to spend those 10, 11 weeks without me. And it meant that I could also finish all the work that I needed to do. And I had made a commitment to work to finish a national audit, which we always had. And I said, look, the audit comes first. But once that is done, we'll leave. And so we spoke to the auditors. They decided to pull the audit forward a little bit. So that went pretty much the way it could be, which was really helpful. And again, I would say, planning in advance and pitching it so early was absolutely key. So here are some photos of some of the equipment and what our house looked like as we were getting closer to the day. So 10 months out, we confirmed everything and we really started getting down to stuff. We had allocated rest days, we had contingency days in case of bad weather. My husband was working on designated places for the food drops along the way and how to get there, because there is no road really that leads where this track is going. We had options for side trips, and we had also looked at if we needed to cut out something where that could be. We had tested the newer equipment, we had tested the recipes that if they were working out, the calorie count matched up, and our training and our personal preparation was really going well. We had created a charity with the National Parks and Wildlife Services to fundraise money for the restoration and maintenance of the huts along the way. And then 4 weeks before we left, we got a letter. And it's like one of those oh shit moments, excuse the language. It was a letter from our landlord advising that they were going to sell the house and that we would have to vacate. And you can imagine what it's like, 10 weeks worth of food, equipment laid all over the house. And we're going like, right, I've got the audit at work, I've got regular work, we've got training, we've got our last minutes checks, repackaging of food. Like, how were we going to find the time to find a house and arrange a move? So we took a deep breath and decided to put everything into storage. And because we looked at the timing, we're going, if we postpone it, then we're going to run too far, potentially into summer, and we would run out of water. So that wasn't good. If we sort of pushed it back even further, we would run into early winter, which wasn't going to be great as well. So we decided to pack everything up, which would lead to the fact that we would get back after 10 weeks and have no place to stay. So I had sort of casually, maybe a bit cynically mentioned that at work. And then one of my colleagues totally blew me away. And she said, you know, our boys have just moved out of our top story, top floor. When you come back, that's where you can stay if you don't have a place to go to. And I thought, wow, that is really, really cool. And one of the things I took away from that is that if people don't know that you've got a challenge, they can't help you. And so it's okay. It's not a sign of weakness to say, I don't know, I've got a problem. It's actually a sign of strength. And it's okay to be grateful for the support that, you know, that people are able to give you. In the meantime, Astrid has been busily working on our website and putting logos together, and we'll get to that later on. But anyway, eventually the audit was done. We had packed the house up. We had all the conversations about how is this going to impact work? What about your relationship? My parents were awfully worried that my husband and I would come back divorced, or that my career would take a massive dip. But anyway, like none of that actually happened. And so this is then our preparation. As we drove down, and so we left. The house was packed up and we left. And hold on. So the drive from Sydney to Melbourne is normally it's 1,000 kilometers, and it took us 6 days to drive down there because of the food drops that we left along the way, which my husband had planned. And we would drop containers on the way down. You can see them packed up in here in our little 2-wheel drive Borena, and we would pick them up again on the return journey. And when we would get back, they would have all the waste. So we would get to one of those deposits, we would take out the food and put our garbage in it. And so Ulf's planning was absolutely meticulous. And when we got to where we wanted to drop off the food, yes, there was still some road that you could drive on or a fire trail, but from there we would either head 200 or 300 meters left or right, up or down, and we would hide the food. And so the food would be hidden, like you see this little tiny sliver of a container sitting here. This is my husband with a GPS location trying to putting down a waypoint. And then these are photos that we would take and say, this is where the food drop is, and this is how we would go back and find it again. Having said that, in spite of all the planning, we did manage to swap 2 food drops around, which we found out later, and it created a bit of a hassle because we were coming up to this really steep section, and at the bottom we had this mountain, and we had packed food, and there was 9 days worth of food, and the backpacks were incredibly heavy. And we got to the top of the first mountain, and where we had allocated our rest days, and I'm looking at our map, I'm looking at the plans that we had made, I'm looking at the amount of food we had, and I said, we packed 9 days worth of food, and the next food drop is 4 days away. Why are we carrying 9 days worth of food? And I went back and checked, and I called my husband, and he goes, right, Houston, we've got a little problem. And so we looked at it, and we had actually swapped the depots 5 and 6 around by accident. And so you then make a decision. You don't want to carry 5 extra days worth of food with you, but you also know that you're going to be short on your next section. So we decided to leave 4 days of food behind at the hut where we were staying, and take an extra 2 days with us to make up for the shortfall on the next one. So again, you got to be creative when these things happen, but you know, it would work out at the end of the day. And so eventually we got to Valhalla, which was just the starting point. I did say Melbourne, but a lot of people don't know Valhalla, and Valhalla is about 180 kilometers outside of Melbourne. It's an old historic gold mining town, and that is where we would start. And we had picked the middle of October for a start. The season would not have snow anymore. That was the expectation, and we would definitely have enough water. Nighttime temperatures would still be at 0, maybe a little bit below, but the daytime temperatures would be in the lower to mid teens, which is absolutely great for walking. So this is what Valhalla looks like on a busy day. And then day 1. So this is a photo. My husband's still cleanly shaven. I had a shower, and actually the last one on the day. And then this is day 1. This is still really new, really still exciting. And that's all we had at that point in time. We had a massive sense of adventure. We had 2 full backpacks. And ahead of us lay hundreds of kilometers of bush, wilderness, and mountains. And at that point in time, we had no idea what it was going to be like. Was our preparation going to be good enough? Were we fit enough? Like, what was going to happen? So it was a bit of trepidation, but it was also a lot of excitement. And so we left Valhalla, and these signs here, you find them along the way. You normally have them where access is really easy. You don't have them when you would actually need them. And so here are just a couple of photos to give you a taste of what the AAWT, the Australian Alps Walking Track, looks like. If you haven't been to Australia, it's different. The Australian Alps Walking Track is probably one of the most different tracks that are around, because it's really remote and it's really versatile. It's got a track, it's called a track, and it has markers like you saw before, but for large sections, you really have to rely on your own navigation. And once you leave Valhalla behind, you're pretty much on your own. There's no phone reception, and you really have to deal with emergency and accidents as they happen on your own, or you wait until rescue services arrive, which you would get through your emergency beacon, and that could potentially take days for them to get there. The track itself doesn't lead through any townships or villages, and it's around not much traveled. I said before, there's, on average 20, probably less than 20 people who actually make the trip throughout the year. And so it's a really good idea to get used to your own company and to your own thoughts. When you do this, there's no guide. So you really have to rely on your own resources and your own abilities. You have to be able to trust yourself, but you can't afford to be too self-assured. Each decision needs to be thought through properly. mistakes you make are time consuming, and they can potentially lead in this kind of environment to really undesirable outcomes. The Australian Alps, by comparison, are not nearly as high as the Rockies, for example, or as the Alps in Europe. They're much, much older, but they still have a mountainous climate, so weather can change like that, as some people found out that we met later along the way. And so the first slide was pretty good weather, but then, you know, some days were a slog. Like you can see here, it was foggy, it was rainy, and then there's no reward for the hard work that you've put in. The thing is, like I said before, you can't just walk out. The closest exit points would be the locations of your food drops, and even they would be 40, 50, 60, 80 kilometers away from a real road or a township. And activating the emergency beacon because you're tired, bored, or similar is a very expensive idea and not recommendable. The services don't take that very kindly at all. But then, you know, there are the absolutely good days where the sun comes up, there's blue sky, you've got $1 million views, you see Brumbies, it's the Australian equivalent to Mustangs. If you're careful, you can come up fairly close to them, as you can see on the top. But yeah, and you can sort of see the kind of area that the Australian Alps Walking Track takes you through. If you're closer to townships, and we're still talking 80, 100 kilometers, there are tracks that are reasonably well marked, like in the bottom one in the middle. If you're further away, there's just a vast area of mountainous plateaus with no tracks on it at all. Are there any questions so far? Okay. So what would a day for us look like? Well, typically the alarm goes off at about 5:30 when the sun comes up. Coldest part of the day would be having breakfast inside the tent, still snuggled up in the sleeping bags, and it would consist of muesli and tea. We would then put out whatever we're going to have throughout the day for lunch and snacks, and then very quickly get dressed, take down the tent, pack up, and be ready to go. And we'd normally be on the road about 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning. We would walk for about 2.5 hours and have a bit of morning tea, which is a muesli bar, nuts, some dried fruit. Then another 2.5 hours until we got to lunch, and lunch could be salami and cheese, bread. I had scrambled eggs there in part. We had couscous, a whole variety. I had actually 20 different dinners packed up, and I'm proud to say that none of our food actually spoiled along the way. And we had chocolate, and if anybody can guess what this picture down in the middle bottom is, you get a brownie point. Any takers for that?
Oh, I'm gonna guess brownie pie.
You're right. It is a chocolate. It's a chocolate cake. It's a chocolate. And you know, the funny thing is, when you're out there, it's the best thing in the world to have. It's the best thing in the world to have. It's a bit charred, and you know, if you were coming over for dinner, I probably would cook something else. But out there, you know, it's just the icing on the cake. So the backpacks would weigh somewhere between 23 to 25 kilos on a day. If we had enough water, mostly we would just sort of walk along the river and take water in throughout the day as we needed it. Sometimes we had to carry a whole day's worth of water with us because there was no water along the way, and then we would have to carry more with us. The photo on the left here is when we got to a depot, and you can see the empty containers here, the food and some shoes all laid out, me going through my checklist to see whether everything was actually there, whether it aligned with the next plan. And then so after we had lunch, we'd walk for another 2.5 hours, have afternoon tea, and then walk for another 2.5 hours until we got to a good dinner place where we could pitch the tent. Hopefully there would be water along close by, otherwise we'd pitch the tent and then we'd go looking for water. Sometimes that would take us 30 minutes if we had to climb down a hill and then back up again. So a campsite here, my husband enjoying a lunch break here, setting up for dinner, having a rest day here where we did a little bit of washing. And this is bottom right-hand corner is probably what an evening would look like. I would keep a diary on what we had experienced throughout the day. And on our GPS, we had a function where we would send out an okay signal. So we had pre-written the words and we could press on a button and it says, hi, it's Sonja and Ulf, we're okay, we are at. And then the system, the GPS would send out the GPS data. Astrid, because she had access to our website, would actually plot the course. So family and friends and anybody who was looking onto the website could actually see where we would be going. And then we would sort of get ready and start cooking dinner. Before we did that, we would also talk about the things that went out, that worked out really well throughout the day and things that didn't work out so well, because we decided that if there's going to be some communication error or we were unhappy with each other, it would pay off to discuss that straight at that point in time. The other thing around the GPS is sometimes we wouldn't move, but we would still send, like when we had a rest day, we would still send out this okay message. No movement and no message would indicate that something was terribly wrong. Luckily that didn't happen, but the people that we had briefed knew that same spot and the message was okay, same spot, no message within 24 hours, not a good idea. And so that's what a day for us would look like. And we would be in bed probably by sunset.
Question for you, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure, Susan, go.
Yeah, I don't know if you mentioned this before, but do you treat your water while you're out there? And if so, how do you do it?
Okay, yeah, good question. Yes, we decided to treat our water there. There are wild foxes in the area and they have Giardia, which gives you pretty bad diarrhea. We used a SteriPen. Let me maybe just go. So the SteriPen works on UV radiation and on batteries. And you can sterilize a liter of water in about 2 minutes, and it doesn't taint the taste of the water, which is really nice because the water out there is really great. It tastes well, it's just you don't want to get sick. So we use the SteriPen. Have you heard of the SteriPen before?
I personally have not, so I'm gonna have to look that up, but thank you.
I'll remind me at the end of the presentation. I'll go back and I'll show you what it looks like. We found the SteriPen worked really well for us because you know, the tablets that you have, they make the water taste like a swimming pool quite often.
Right.
Yeah, so we used the SteriPen, which worked really well for us.
That's great. Thank you.
So when I went through the day, it sounded like it's very regimented, but that regular rhythm really helped us get through it because it put structure into an otherwise schedule-free day. And funnily enough, it helped create relaxation and less stress because it was so easy when you're walking through this area to get carried away by what you see or by, you know, the effort that was required to get up a hill that one could potentially forget to eat on a regular basis. And we found out during our training hikes that it wasn't really good or conducive if one didn't eat on a regular basis, and it quickly produced a downward spiral. While we had tried to gain weight before we left, we still managed to lose 15 kilos between the two of us, which is a fair bit of weight, considering that none of us were overweight. And the other thing is the dinner was a really important part of the day because, like I said, I had 20 different dinners, which was really exciting. And we had dessert every night. And it may sound extravagant, but we found that if you had a really shitty bad day, sitting in your tent with a hot cup of tea and like either chocolate or the chocolate cake and a nice dinner made such a difference. Yeah, so having that was really important for us. And like I said, having that structure really helped. It wasn't all rosy though. And so we did have a fair few challenges along the way. As I said before, it's a marked track in those areas where it's easily accessible. It's not so marked in the areas that are less accessible. And while we, for the most part, we did really well, we had two areas that I personally found extremely challenging. Real low point was Black Creek, where the area was so overgrown that it took us an hour and a half to negotiate 300 meters. That's 900 yards. Sorry, 900 feet. So it took us an hour and a half to walk, crawl through whatever 900 feet of terrain. And there was absolutely no workaround, and it was exhausting and it was demoralizing because it was at the end of our day and we were getting like really, really tired. Then the other really challenging thing was the Cobboras. The Cobboras are an absolutely designated wilderness area. And it's the mountain range before the Coastrek Flat, and it's the head of the Murray River, which is one of Australia's largest rivers. We had arrived at the Cobboras the day before, earlier throughout the day, and we had taken the afternoon to climb the various summits that make up the Cobboras. And so early on the next day, we set out for this Coastrek Flat, where we had planned the next night's camp would be. As we were leaving the high grounds of the Cobboras, the regrowth of trees and bushes from a recent bushfire increased, and visibility went to about 3 to 5 meters, and literally everything looked the same. We could hardly see where we placed our feet because you couldn't see the ground beneath yourself. And so you would step on something and sometimes you would hit solid ground, sometimes you were just on some shambles and your foot would break through for a foot until you reached. So it was really, really hard going. We had plotted a course which would get us from the campsite in the Cobboras to Coastrek Flat, but it was just sort of a best guess. On top of that, there were like massive outcrops, stone outcrops like you see here in the middle picture, that you had to either walk over or underneath. And so as a scout, I'm walking ahead, my husband's in the back with the GPS. More subconsciously than consciously, I took the lower option when we came to these outcrops. And so according to the man with the GPS, we were getting too low, which means we're getting significantly off this plotted course. And so he says, you need to go up and over the outcrops and don't take the easy option underneath. And we did that for an hour and a half and we're still not making any progress. And so it was really, really hard. And then I said, and so I tried and we were getting too low again. He says, you're not making any progress. And it was just getting really, really hard. So I lost it at some point in time. I said, look, why don't you take the lead for a while and see if you can do any better? So to his credit, 20 minutes into that, he turned around and he goes, look, this is abysmal. We're not making any progress. I'm not doing a better job than you are. He was totally apologetic. And, but we realized at that point that if we continued on that trajectory, we were going to end up somewhere totally else. And it wasn't going to be as conducive to where we needed to be later on throughout the day. And so luckily we came across a little clearing and we said, all right, we have to take time out. We really need to reassess. We need to know where we are. We need to look at where we need to be We need to get the communications out of the way, the frustration that I was building up. I was angry, I was tired, I was afraid, I was crying. So I totally lost it. And I said to him, look, mate, you plod away out of here. Don't tell me that whether I'm too high or have to go over the outcrops or below. Just give me directions and tell me every 15 minutes how we're going, and I'll get us out of here. I'll be the scout. I'll keep on walking. And so I said also, you need to give me positive directions. Don't tell me where I'm off track, but tell me where I need to go. And so we walked along that, and then about half an hour after that, we saw this in the distance, this tiny little area which indicated grass, which meant that we were getting closer to Coastrek Flat. We kept on walking, and it disappeared. And so we kept on walking, and then another half an hour later, it appeared in the summer. It was like a much bigger plotty area in the distance. And so, you know, it took us a long while to get on. You can see on the photos what we had to negotiate through. You can see in the top left-hand corner, this is sort of the stuff that we had to walk through. And Coastrek Flat is a really funny place because back in 1956, a Royal Australian Air Force plane crash landed there, and because one of the engines had failed. So we kept on walking. We saw this Coastrek Flat come up bigger and bigger. And then all of a sudden we were on a Brumby track, which is really funny because there are Brumbies actually in that area. And so this is what the remains of that airplane looked like. And it was absolutely exhilarating to find that and to finally get out of that bushy area over there. Then there were some other challenges that we sort of had to get through, which was, you know, a bit of bad weather along the way, looking for water, timbered peaks. This is one of my favorite shots up here. Is you walk up a hill and with the expectation that you're going to have a great view when you get to the top, and then you don't. Trying to get water out of a water tank at one of the huts. There's absolutely no other water in the vicinity here at all, and we knew that there was a water tank. What we didn't expect was that the water was going to be almost empty. Crossing snowfields. I said before, we did expect that there wasn't going to be any snow, but we did come across some snowfields. Yeah, so sometimes finding water was a challenge. Sometimes the weather was a little bit less than ideal. And then the constant challenge of walking up mountains with a heavy backpack. Having said that, we only had a couple of those days, and for the most part, life was absolutely good and great. Yeah, it's just such a spectacular area to walk through, just to see. And like every time I look at these photos, I'm still going, wow, you know, we made that, we did that. So that was pretty awesome. And seeing those areas that so few people actually walk through. I said before, not a lot of people are there, and that's true. We met, so over those 820 kilometers, 51 days, we met 12 people all up, which is not a lot, I would say. And so I just thought, you know, talking about the challenges and stuff like that, but for the most part, it was absolutely beautiful. And these are just some of the shots, some of the photos I thought I'd share with you along this journey. Again, I heard of Brumbies. This was sort of near the Coastrek Flat. Blue Lakes, stunning array of absolutely clear but freezingly cold rivers and lakes. Again, the Cobboras, a bit of a watershed really, because standing up here looking at the cliff, an amazing experience with all, you know, 360 degrees views, just absolutely stunning. So the opposites of what you can experience in a really short period of time. Yeah, it was pretty exciting. But all things come to an end. So after 51 days on a rainy day, we arrived at Namadgi National Parks. At that point in time, we had walked 820 kilometers, 51 days. The 55 meters of ascent and descent had increased to about 60,000 meters. Our biggest day, longest day walking was 28 kilometers, and it was all off track. We had lost 15 kilos of weight. However, we didn't really get lost, not even in the covers. We sort of knew where we were, but it was like we didn't really get lost, and there were no injuries. When we got to Namadgi, when we got to this national parks off, it was really funny because we walked in and the lady said, "Oh, you did the track?" And we're going, yeah, we did. She goes, "Do you want coffee?" And I said, "Oh, coffee would be like absolutely amazing." And I'm going, "Oh, right. What do you think I was looking for?"
Honey.
Right. So the concept of paying for something had like totally and utterly escaped me. And the lady, she said, she was laughing. She goes, "Right, that's right. It's on the house." She said, "I'm sure you've got money somewhere, but it's on the house. You can have a coffee and you can have a cookie on top of that as well." So yeah, and you can see sort of here we're looking a little bit rugged, a bit worse for wear on here, but with big smiles. And so, you know, some of the keys to success of getting us where we needed to be, what we needed to bring to the game was, you know, commitment, preparation and planning, a clear division of labor and responsibility, and along with that, a no blame. So if I was responsible for the food and the food didn't work, I knew I was at fault and my husband didn't need to blame me or anything. I said, like, "You did this." It was quite clear who was responsible for what. And we did say there's no blame. We'd given it our best effort. If it didn't work out, well, at least we had tried. We needed to be flexible. We needed to be absolutely resilient. We needed to have trust and believe in ourselves. And most importantly, we needed to share and celebrate the wins that we had. So standing at the top of the Copperas near the cleft, wow. Standing on top of Mount Kosciuszko, Australia's highest mountain at 2,223 meters, yes. You know, celebrate the wins, make absolutely sure you know what's counting. That it's so easy to just count the stuff that didn't work or the challenges, but it's so much more important to really make sure that, you know, you count what you've actually achieved. And so started the journey back, picking up the empty containers along the way. But I did say I wanted to talk about some of the stuff. Oops, sorry. The charity and the hike for huts. So Astrid very kindly put together this very cute little logo, which is a replica of Mawson's hut. And you know, when we started out saying we wanted to do this, people said, "Oh, you know, if you're putting in this effort, why don't you do it for a good cause?" And we thought, okay, well, what is a cause that's close to hiking and close to Australia? So we thought, we'll have a look, we'll try to support the huts. So the Australian Alps has around 200 historic huts, and some of them dating back to the 1860s, bearing in mind that Australia is still a comparatively young country. And they go back to every period of European history. They were used by graziers, by gold hunters, by foresters, later on by government workers, skiers, and bushwalkers. Some have been built in memory of lives lost, like the Clive Cole hut or Seaman's hut, and very unfortunate accidents that happen in the Alps. But overall, those huts represent a really rich cultural heritage of the Alps, and they need to be managed to ensure their survival. Back in the days when they were built, they all had an open door policy in the sense that they were left unlocked. They are still unlocked today. You can't book them. If you're in there and somebody else needs to come in, you just, you know, move together and you make space. They're always stocked with matches and a small amount of dry firewood and a bit of kindling. If people have excess food like we had through our little miscalculation, you're free to leave them, but you need to make sure that you sort of put them in the rat-proof or mice-proof or possum-proof metal boxes that are there. And so this culture that they're there to help the survival, that's still there today. And yes, we've had life lost and we lose lives in the Australian Alps, unfortunately, on a regular basis, but they've also saved the lives of many people. So we decided it's going to be the charity hike for huts. And so again, like I said, Astrid just put together the logo. She has, while we were hiking, she's kept the webpage updated. She sort of knew which huts we were close to, and she posted it on our website so that the people reading the website could see where we were. And we raised a total of $2,500, which the government matched. There's $5,000 that went into the restoration upkeep of those huts. Unfortunately, some of them do get vandalized if they're closer to civilization, which is really tough because they do ensure the survival of long distance hikers and long distance skiers throughout winter. And for us, they were also like a bit of civilization, because you walk in and there are rickety old chairs and rickety old tables in there, but at least you're not sitting on the ground and you're out of the weather for a while. So very fond memories. And we still go back to many of the huts. Wasn't such we come across almost every year when we're out there. This one here also not far away, beautiful early morning misty photo. So yeah, they are important and they're actually quite dear to us. So one of the questions that we had to that we were asked quite often is like, why don't you do Mount Everest with all the effort, all the work, all the preparation that you've done in? And funnily enough, while we're at Clive Cole Hut, there was an Australian couple and the gentleman had just been to Mount Everest. And he says, from a physical point of view, you guys are absolutely fit enough to do it. But he also said that it's very commercialized and there's lots and lots of people. And I think that is a decision that my husband and I had made, that we didn't want this. So on the right-hand side, you see a photo that I think back in 2017 or 18 was a photo going up to the top of Mount Everest, and you see the hordes of people going up. In comparison, it's a photo of me going up one of the mountains there. A photo of Mount Everest base camp and a place where we camped. So emotionally, physically, same, but different. You know, anybody who wants to go up Mount Everest, I totally take off my hat to that effort, to the work that goes in. It is a very, very different challenge working with oxygen packs and stuff like that. So I have the utmost admiration for the people who do that. It's just not what I wanted for myself. And so I'm really happy that we did the trip that we did. So that's why we didn't do Mount Everest. And then turning some of the learning skills, the learnings into whoops, hello. So I spoke about before that the Australian Alps are younger, but they still have a very mountainous climate, and people do get caught there unawares. And this is what happened to these three guys over here. And this is at Siemens Hut. Siemens Hut was one of the huts that got built because three young skiers perished not far away during a snowstorm many, many years ago. And so we got to Siemens Hut on a day that was everything but ideal. We had decided to walk because we had the GPS. We were ultimately familiar with the area and we had the proper clothing for it. We got there, it was about 11:30 in the morning, and we decided we're not going to walk any further. No need to push our luck. And we lit the stove. And then there was a knock, knock, knock on the door, and these three guys came in. When we took this photo, you'll notice all three of them are already laughing. When they walked in, they were everything but laughing. This guy here on the left was hardly responding when you spoke to him. And I thought, I think I know what he's got. So he was definitely suffering from hypothermia. I knew what it felt like. I know what it looked like because I've had it a couple of years before when I did the Coastrek. And so you got to imagine it's about 0 degrees centigrade outside, so 32 degrees Fahrenheit. It's raining, snowing, and it's incredibly windy, and he's soaked through and through. When somebody's got hypothermia, you can't just put them in front of the fire because the body will start cooling down even further. He refused to eat and he refused to drink. So we're really sort of pushing him, forcing him to have warm tea with lots of sugar, then a bit more hot tea. So eventually we got him up, we got him to eat some cookies and some nuts, bearing in mind that we didn't have a lot of food to share either. So about 2 hours in, he started to uncurl. We had asked him to undress as far as he could. There were some old, not very pretty and not very clean blankets, but at least they were dry and they were warm. So he took off his clothing, we put the blankets on him, we started rubbing him down a little bit. And so eventually after 2 hours, he started to respond, he started to talk. We put his clothing next to the oven, really trying to revive him. And we took this photo just before they were ready to head off again. Bear in mind, the car was only about 2 hours away. Probably could have ended differently for him if he hadn't stopped. We don't know. We did get a text message from them weeks later that they'd made it back to the car. But those are just some of the things that, you know, you need to be prepared for. And if you're out there, yes, there's just the two of us, but not helping them was just not an option at that point in time. You look at the resources that you have, you try to make the best out of that. So some of the learnings from the hike is, you know, communicate challenges. I've said that before. Make a decision, because making no decision is bad. A bad decision can be revised, but making no decision isn't going to get you anywhere. Find a balance between risk and adventure. With those mountainous peaks, I said, you know, hard work and reaching a target doesn't necessarily equal a reward. Definitely work with a no blame approach. Can't rely on others to recognize your needs. We had that when we were looking for water one day. The water hole that we had envisaged was actually empty. There wasn't any water there, and we're going, all right, this is not good. The next water that we knew of was about 23 kilometers away, a whole day's walk for us. We had pitched the tent near a fire trail on that day, luckily. And this four-wheel drive came back. We held him down. He gave us a lecture on being out there in the wild unprepared, but he did give us 1.5 liters of water. And we asked him whether he had seen any water because he came from the direction in which we were walking. And he said, nah, there's no water until you get to the far end, which we knew. So we got up extra early the next morning because we wanted to walk in the cold or in the cooler time of day as much as possible. Within 45 minutes, we came across water. It was coming off the high side of the road, of that fire trail, and a small trickle across the road, and then it sort of disappeared. The guy in the four-wheel drive, he hadn't seen it. He didn't need to see it. He had the water. So that's what I'm trying to say. It's like, don't rely on others to recognize your needs, because they look after themselves. And then debrief, assess, optimize, and celebrate. They obviously turn into skills in the workplace, which I'm not going to go into, but they're on the right-hand side of that. You know, passion, vision, persistence, integrity, decisiveness, communication, self-confidence, self-esteem. So what came next then for us? I came back to the office, everybody celebrated, but coming back was weird. Having been out there for 7 weeks, hardly talking to anybody, and all of a sudden we were back in Canberra on the second night. And that's where we actually got lost. We got lost on the way from the hotel to the pub that we wanted to go and have dinner at. Being back in a town, there was noises, there were smells, blinking lights, flashing cars. It was like total mayhem. And it took us about, I think, 3 weeks to really get back into what proper civilization looked like. But then I went back to work and I initiated a corporate well-being program. I coached almost 400 of my colleagues in self-leadership, resilience, and teamwork. I started rock climbing and I founded my own company. So I think in summary, you know, when you come up for your next challenge or your next dream, what would I suggest? I know you should do it, you can do it, and you will do it if you just persist. And so these are some of the people that I did my funny walks with, people celebrating here, you know. And know that know that you can just do it. And these are some of the quotes of the people that I went out with. I'm so proud of being part of the team that made it. I'm feeling great. I had such a great day, definitely doing the 60-kilometer challenge next year. I surprised myself that I didn't give in and I made it. That's somebody who walked 60 kilometers with me. And then one of my favorites is I completed the 60-kilometer walk. 15 hours of walking the rain made me realize that everyone has potential. And I think that's what I sort of take away from, you know, those challenges. If you really want to, you can. So there are no limits to what you can accomplish except the limit you place on your own thinking. And that's me and the Australian Alps Walking Track. Over to you, my lovely audience. Questions, concerns. And I did promise you, Susan, a starry pen. So let me just get that up.
I must say we use the Steri pen as well, and we refer to it as the water lightsaber.
Yeah. So Susan, this slideshow from current slide. So this is what the Steri pen looks like here. It takes two AA batteries, and when you light it, it lights up like this, and the color goes a really funny blue, which you normally don't see because it's when you put it into like a water bottle, like a metal water bottle, you can't see it. Yeah, it's absolutely great.
I see. Thank you.
So any thoughts? How does it compare to some of the hikes that you guys have done in the US?
I've never done anything this long. We've always had major breakups when it comes to breaks in between or assistance. So this is very impressive, Sonja.
Yeah, I haven't done anything like this myself either. Mostly I only do day hikes, so yeah, backpacking it's something that I'm working toward, but I haven't done that yet.
Look, I probably wouldn't have done this off the top of my head if we hadn't really gone out on previous occasions. I mean, I think before we left, the longest hike we did was probably 2.5 weeks. But after that, I'm not saying it becomes repetitive, but you sort of understand what you need to start looking for. And so the planning that went into this, I mean, you can see on the slide here, this is the spreadsheets that I had, weighing up the food, calculating calories. We met somebody along the way who did the whole trek in 18 days. Very different. It's similar to the Mount Everest challenge, right? You can look at this in different ways. So the guy, he did it in 18 days, an amazing physical feat. Along the huts, there are logbooks, and they strongly suggest that if you're in the Alps, you leave a little note so that should you get lost, that's where the rangers and the emergency services start looking for you if they think you're in the area, and they sort of will follow the breadcrumbs that you leave in terms of the logbook. So you're saying you're walking north to south, or you're here and you're doing this side trip or that side trip. So reading through this, he hated it. He says, there's no fun. He didn't do any of the side trips. We did all of the side trips along the way. So that's why from the initial 650 kilometers, we ended up with 820, but he did none of the side trips. He got up at 4:30 in the morning and he sort of just rushed through it. Again, from a physical point of view, great. But this is a trip that also invites you to just stop and smell the roses on occasion. And it's difficult. It's a hard thing to do, you know. So different ways of looking at it. We also met somebody and we had to share food with him as well, because he sort of went like, oh, I think I'm just going to go ahead and do it. And he did. And then he came to an area where he couldn't progress as fast as he wanted. And he pitched the tent in a similar area that we did. And then he says, do you guys have any food left over? Because I ran out 2 days away from the next township where he was going to meet parents. And we're going through our stuff and going, okay, well, here's a handful of pasta that we can probably give away. Here are a bit of nuts, some dried food. And I said, look, this is as much as we can give you because we still need to get to our next depot. So it's not something that I would probably undertake just at the spur of the moment. Were we over-planned, over-prepared? Maybe. Did we need to call in the emergency services? No. Do we live to tell the tale? Yes. You know, make your own call on how you want to have a look at that. But because I think we were so over-prepared, we could actually make this quite enjoyable.
I'd like to know, would you do it again?
Oh, hard question. Sections of it, definitely. I would probably take my favorite points and do those again. It's almost like, you know, I did something different. We started part of the Te Aurora track, which goes through the length of New Zealand, 2,500 kilometers. It's probably something I would consider next up once we get to travel again. But I would definitely go back and do sections of the AAWT. And if you were to come down here, Christy or Susan, and you would say, you know, put together like a 5-day itinerary of your favorites, I could definitely do that. Anything less than 5 days is probably Arctica on my to-do list.
Awesome.
That does require us getting out of the lockdown and past COVID, but hiking in Patagonia is definitely on there. Whether I'll actually make it to Antarctica is debatable, because I really, really don't like the cold that much. But you know, there's enough good clothing out there. But yeah, Patagonia definitely. And I did Machu Picchu in a 4-day hike, so the South American Andes. Did that. That was pretty amazing as well.
Was there one gear repair, or one that sticks in your mind throughout this trip that you kind of impressed yourself with? I know I've fixed a lot of things with duct tape in the past. Was there anything like that that stuck out as being a memorable, whoa, how did we do this? And I can't believe we fixed it.
No, look, funnily enough, the gear all held up. We had sore feet, but we didn't even have a blister. So this is really boring. Terribly sore feet, but no blister. No, the gear, I'm just trying to think. No, the gear held up okay. I think the biggest challenge really was getting out of the cobras. That was really tough, like emotionally and mentally really tough. But we didn't even break a shoestring. How boring is that?
Well, that's good. You had great gear then. Any other questions?
Were there any points during your journey that you thought you couldn't do this and consider quitting? Was there anything like that at all?
I think there were a couple of points. I think like in the cobras where I was really going, like I was swearing a lot with myself and going like, why did I ever do this? But I found that, because I said there's no easy way out. So by the time you would actually get to a point where you could consider making the decision of walking out, the bad mood or the disappointment would typically have dissolved already. Yeah, so there wasn't really a point where I really, really would have been ready to pull the pin. Mostly because that's why I said, the rewards and the good times, they were definitely more good, definitely more good than bad.
And you're still married, so that worked out well.
Yes, and yes, we're still married. That is true. We're still married. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's still amazing, even after so many years and after I've seen all these photos, it still blows me away.
It does. And you know, the thing is, there are so many, well, not so many, but there were few people who work in the background. And, you know, Astrid, you know, thank you. This is, you know, I can't say it loud enough.
No, it's all right.
Carol, who actually made sure that we had a place to stay, and you offered as well, a place to stay after we came back. And that was, you know, the support that we had for such a crazy undertaking. And when I came back to the office, people are going, "Oh, you're still alive." And then everybody wanted to have a share. And I came back a week before Christmas and I thought, oh, I'll get to some work. But I spent the whole week just talking about the trip. So many people came by, our CEO came by, the managing director came by and said, "Oh, tell us about the trip. And what was it like?" So there was a lot of support at the end. People were skeptical before we set out, but then once they saw us come back, yeah, everybody wanted a slice of that.
Yeah, because a lot of Australians don't know their backyard.
Well, that's true. That's true, and it is such a great backyard.
Yeah. Perfect.
Excellent.
Thank you so much for sharing tonight, Sonja. What an adventure.
Thank you. Well, thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
So happy that I, you know, could make it's something different, different continent, different country, but yeah, really happy I was able to share with you guys.
Awesome. And when we send out the recording, do you mind if we include your email if anyone has questions that they would like to ask beyond this?
Oh, by all means, go for it. Susan, if you email me on that, I can send you the details on the stereo pin or anything else that might interest you.
Absolutely. And thank you again for sharing your story with us.
Happy, you know, the memories come back from me, so I love to share this one.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for this evening. Sonja, thank you again for sharing your adventure. And we look forward to seeing you all next time.
Lovely.
Yeah, and thanks for organizing.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for organizing. Thank you.
Night.
Bye.